It's the heart of winter in Yellowstone National Park. Rugged, cold, unforgiving, and spectacular. Wildlife continues on. Geysers erupt in dramatic fashion, and there's a fraction of the visitors found in the warmer months. So I'm here to experience it all and photograph some wildlife, including one of Yellowstone's most elusive predators, the gray wolf. It's wintertime here in Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone is one of America's most popular national parks, and in the winter, that changes. Visitation drops off as cold temperatures and snow blanket the park. Most roads are closed to vehicle traffic, and with less people, wildlife can be more prevalent. Plus, the beauty of a stark white snowscape makes a winter visit an unforgettable experience. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking 2 days to explore Lamar Valley and the northern part of Yellowstone, the only section of the park's road that is cleared of snow and open to private vehicles. After that, I'm taking a snow coach down to Old Faithful and the interior of the park. And while I'm here to photograph landscapes and wildlife of all kinds, it's the wolves that I'm really hoping to see. Wolves that are generally far more active in the wintertime. So let's get to it. Heading through Denver and on to Bozeman, Montana, a delayed flight had me a little bit behind schedule. But no matter. I'd be spending the first night in Bozeman anyways, before making the roughly 90-minute drive down to Gardner, Montana, right on the edge of Yellowstone. Landing in Bozeman, well, there was certainly no shortage of snow. Not that I was complaining either. An early night, the next day the snow hadn't subsided, which meant a cautious drive down to Gardner. We stopped by downtown Bozeman for a delicious breakfast at the Cat Eye Cafe. Highly recommend, before starting the drive down. The stretch from Bozeman to Gardner isn't ideal in the snow, but the closer we got, the more it cleared. Until we rolled into this small town that serves as a gateway to northern Yellowstone. And in no time at all, the snow returned, though not exactly at the same intensity as earlier. No trip to Gardner would be complete without checking out the Roosevelt Arch. And from there, we began the drive up the now paved Old Gardner Road into Yellowstone and Mammoth Hot Springs. In Mammoth, you'll find just about everything you need. A full-scale lodge, dining, visitor center, gas station, snow coach transportation, as well as some hot springs. But more on those later. Time was limited today, so we were heading straight towards Lamar Valley. Just outside of Mammoth, we had our first wildlife sighting, a herd of elk up on the ridge. One young bull and quite a few cows were feeding on the hillside. We stopped and observed for a little while, and I got some perfectly fine shots. No disrespect to this fine group, but I wanted to get further into the park, especially with the snow starting up again. It was a perfect opportunity to get some frosty shots of one of Yellowstone's most famous animals. I'm talking about the bison, of course. Winter brings snow, and in turn, snow-covered bison, which makes for some really incredible photographs. Heading up the road, it didn't take long to spot some. A pair were weathering the storm and getting ready to make their way across. It may look pretty cold, but bison develop thick coats for the winter, along with extra fat that, despite the accumulation on their fur, keeps them toasty and warm. Food, on the other hand, can be a little tougher to come by. Observe a herd in Yellowstone's winter, and you'll see them using their massive heads and horns to dig through the snow to get to grasses and mosses underneath. A ranger explained it to me this way. In warmer months, bison eat cereal, hardy grasses, and leafy plants. In the wintertime, they eat the box it came in, pretty much anything they can get to under all of that snow. I was looking for a larger herd though, so we continued up a bit, actually finding quite a few along the way. The best ended up being at the now frozen floating lake. A large herd was resting and grazing around it, or occasionally walking across it. I got out, set up my camera here, and started shooting. More and more of them began emerging from the tree line off to the left, and the opportunity was right to get some frosted buffalo photos. And as they trudged through the deep snow, here is what I walked away with. Not half bad. We stayed a bit longer to watch the herd move along before they began to bed down for the night. Sunlight was fading rapidly, and one place I don't want to drive in the dark is Yellowstone, let alone in the wintertime. So Lamar Valley and the wolves would have to wait until tomorrow. We took the rest of our time to stop at a pull-off and admire the winter views, and Lamar Valley from afar. Tomorrow, that's exactly where we were headed. Back down to Gardner, we checked into the room at the local Rhodopa Lodge, before enjoying dinner at the Cowboys Lodge and Grill. Busy and bustling in the summer, Gardner was kind of a ghost town now. Many of the businesses actually closed down for the winter. One filling dinner later, it was time to turn in for the night. There was a lot to see in the morning, including what would be a fantastic surprise. Single-digit temperatures greeted us in the morning. No matter. It was wintertime, and it would actually end up pleasantly warm later on in the day. With no time to waste, it was back up into the park and heading toward Lamar Valley. Making it as far as Phantom Lake here, we found a reasonably sized crowd of photographers. There was something up on the hillside. A massive bull elk, out for breakfast. I parked the car and we made the journey over his way, being mindful, of course, to stay a safe distance away. Their rut was long over, so these guys are more placid. Still, give them their 25 yards of space. This fine gentleman was happy to have the paparazzi around, or rather, just didn't care. He munched on the hillside while we observed and popped some pictures off. Watching just a bit longer, it was eventually time to continue forward to try and find some wolves. The general rule of thumb for wildlife spotting is that they're most active during the morning and at dusk. But that rule actually changes in the wintertime. For wolves at least. You have a better chance of spotting them during the daylight hours, before they bed down during the freezing temperatures that come at night. I figured Lamar Valley was my best chance at spotting some. The Junction Butte Pack, one of Yellowstone's resident wolf packs, had been active around that area this winter. Yesterday's snowstorm had coated the trees in a wonderful layer of the white stuff. It was positively beautiful. Not beautiful enough for me to miss quite a bit of commotion at the hell-roaring overlook, though. There was a large contingent of people and numerous spotting scopes trained on the valley below. It could really mean only one thing: wolves. The wonderful folks from the Yellowstone Wolf Project had their scopes set up and brought us up to speed. The Junction Butte Pack was down below, currently bedded down. Not only that, they had killed a bison the night prior and had been feeding on the carcass off and on. I'm going to give a proper warning that the next bit of footage might be a little gruesome for some. Nature is not always kind. I set up my camera, and with some assistance, was able to train my view on the carcass down below. Even at a 900mm equivalent, it was still a long ways off, so I'm going to punch a lot of this footage in quite a bit. Forgive the quality of it. And if you aren't up for seeing the dead bison and a number of animals feeding on it, feel free to skip ahead now to 12:22 in the video. There it was down below, swarmed by ravens and magpies, but no wolves. The canines you're seeing are actually a handful of coyotes being opportunistic scavengers. I watched them eating for quite a bit. The folks from the Wolf Project had their scopes trained on the wolves themselves, but I had trouble finding them with my camera. It was a long ways away, and kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. I decided to stay on the carcass when the coyote stopped and perked up. Something was coming. Just up the ridge, this large black wolf was making its way down. My first wolf sighting. Even from a distance. How exciting was that? And where was it heading? By the looks of things, it was making its way down to the carcass. 2 of the 3 coyotes left, and 1 brave one stayed to continue eating. The wolf was getting closer now, and then it stopped just a bit above the bison. What was going to happen next? And then, the chase was on. The coyote bolted, with the wolf following right behind. It seemed like the coyote had it beat, but in no time at all, the wolf closed the distance. I could see now the size difference between the two. The wolf was huge compared to the coyote. I was surprised how long it gave chase for. Little did I know that wolves actually do hunt coyotes in the park. I'm not sure if that was the exact case here. But the chase ended eventually, and our wolf friend here made its way back to the carcass. It was time for a bite to eat. Pun mostly intended. Moving on from that, we observed for a bit longer, with this black wolf eventually bedding down. And how exciting! A proper wolf sighting. And unbeknownst at the time, it wouldn't be the last. I was pretty content for now, so we decided to make our way down into Lamar Valley to see what we could find. Normally chock full of bison, Lamar Valley was pretty much empty, save for some beautiful winter views. We did spot a handful of bison near the beginning, and then nothing. Perhaps it's harsher down here in the winter, or more difficult to find food, so the herds move upwards closer to Mammoth? It kinda seemed that way, though I'm not entirely sure. If you happen to know, feel free to comment down below. We drove as far as Pebble Creek before deciding to turn back around. The landscapes were absolutely stunning, and bluebird skies began to emerge, along with warmer temperatures too. A stark contrast with yesterday's weather. Our only wildlife sighting was what was maybe a coyote off in the distance, but it escaped our view pretty quickly. Wanting ample time to hike the boardwalk trail around Mammoth Hot Springs, we started the drive back when there was a large crowd of photographers congregating at one of the hillsides. We parked and headed over, camera and tripod in tow. What was it? The answer was 4 bighorn sheep making their way along the cliff edge. It was my first time ever spotting these, and after making their way behind the trees, they emerged right on the edge of that cliff. You couldn't ask for a better frame. Pawing through the snow looking for food, striking their best poses, and trudging along, it was great to watch them go about their business and get some really good photographs to match. I really enjoyed watching them in the snow. The stark white background made for an incredible, almost surreal looking contrast. This wasn't just a wildlife spotting trip, and with it being mid-afternoon, it was time to leave our sheep friends behind and head back to Mammoth for a hike. A quick stop back at Hell Roaring, we learned the wolves had now bedded down out of sight. No matter. It was time to explore some of Yellowstone's geothermal features. Located outside of the Yellowstone caldera, Mammoth Hot Springs is still fueled by the same geothermal system as Yellowstone's other volcanic features, like the geyser basins and mud pots we'd be heading to later. These terraced hot springs are formed by the mineralized water, namely calcium carbonate, that emerges from geothermal vents nearby. The best views come in seasons without snow, since they generally, or at least during this visit, end up covered. Despite this, it's still worth the hike for the uniqueness of the winter views. The trail here is a collection of boardwalks over the hot springs. It's important to remember to stay on these boardwalks, as a step off onto the often thin crust around Yellowstone could put you into some boiling water. 2.5 miles round trip, the trail system through Mammoth leads you to various terraces and hot springs. In the summer, you don't have to necessarily hike the entire thing, but can instead drive to parking areas near viewpoints for a shorter walk. In the wintertime, it's a little more limited, generally starting from the lower parking areas. While still possible to complete the out and back, certain offshoots or loops may be closed due to snow and ice. Crampons probably aren't a bad idea either, as certain parts of the trail may be pretty slippery. Heading forward and past this nice magpie, we came up to Pallet Spring first. Terraces are pretty notable here, but maybe not as much in the wintertime covered in snow. And just a heads up, I'm not going to dwell too much on the individual features found here in Mammoth. That's probably better saved for a more in-depth guide to Yellowstone as a whole. So, contradicting that immediately, we headed upwards toward Canary Springs, one of the other more prominent features in Mammoth, passing Mountain Springs and Jupiter Terrace along the way. The village looked extra cozy down below, with a perfect mountain winterscape around it. As did the canyon and Gardner River over to the east. The yellow of Yellowstone being a little difficult to see, covered in snow this time of year. Eventually, we reached Canary Springs. And while it was a little difficult to observe, we could still spot some of the turquoise blue hues from the water on top. With the sun setting, it was simply wonderful to take in these beautiful and unique views of Yellowstone. A lovely ending to a great day. If this isn't nice, then I don't know what is. An icy morning in Gardner gave way to an icy morning in Mammoth, and at 7:45 a.m. sharp, I boarded my snow coach for Old Faithful, where I'd only be spending a single night in a cabin at the Snow Lodge. Snowmobile or snow coach are the only ways to enter the interior of the park in the winter. I booked through the park's official concessionaire, linked below. It's not exactly cheap either. A round-trip snow coach ride, a necessity if you're overnighting at Old Faithful, was around $330. Most snowmobile groups are through guided tours, though there is a lottery permit system now for non-commercial groups. That is, anyone with a snowmobile who would like to explore the park this way. Info on that linked below as well. It's a roughly 4-hour ride down to Old Faithful, give or take a bit. Your driver will generally stop for any interesting wildlife, like this fox we saw, among others, along the way. There's a handful of viewpoints and short treks they stop for too, including Gibbon Falls on the ride down, and then Artist Paint Pots and Firehole Falls on the return trip. Both rides also feature a stop at the Madison Warming Hut, which has heated bathrooms as well as a small cafe for snacks and hot drinks. So we began our journey out of Mammoth, passing through the Golden Gate and into Yellowstone's higher elevations. Winter was at full blast up here today, as you can see. Snow and high winds made for an interesting drive, to say the least. Kudos to our driver for handling it like a champ. Eventually, the weather calmed down, and I was content to simply sit back, listen to our knowledgeable driver, and take in some of these amazing views. A few stubborn bison and that earlier snowstorm aside, it was a relatively smooth ride down, with quick stops at a hot spring and then a bathroom. A bathroom located along a beautiful river view. Next up was Gibbon Falls, and was it ever incredible? Blue skies, a perfect waterfall, and blowing snow across the caldera made for some wonderful scenery, even if it was a bit windy out still. A bit of a bison jam aside, next up was that Madison warming hut. A great place to get out and stretch our legs for an extended period of time. Our driver mentioned there being a nice view just past the parking lot, so I made my way down there to check it out. And he definitely wasn't lying. Once I had my fill, I made my way back to the parking lot. It was kind of fun to take in all the winter commotion of the snowmobiles and snow coaches. I'm still in awe of these vehicles. These tires are huge. A necessity, though, to maneuver over Yellowstone's snow-covered, groomed roads in the wintertime. Into the early afternoon now, I was ready to hit the road and get down to Old Faithful. I was excited to see the upper Geyser basin covered in snow, and maybe even hike around it a little bit. And of course, maybe even spot some wolves. Though without a personal vehicle and no wildlife tour booked, I figured this was a long shot. And perhaps I should just be content with spotting the Junction Butte Pack the day prior. So of course, just outside of Old Faithful, near Fairy Falls in the Grand Prismatic Spring, something appeared not too far off the road. It was another black wolf, a member of the Wapiti Lake Pack. I was told this pack has been very active this winter, with frequent appearances in this area, and near the roadside, no less. This one was certainly closer than yesterday's. Our driver stopped the coach and was kind enough to open the door to give me a chance to shoot unobstructed. Hand-holding a 600mm telephoto lens is no easy feat though, so forgive some shaky footage if you can. This wolf seemed pretty curious, making its way south along the tree line, and stopping occasionally for a good howl. How incredible was that? We watched it for maybe around 10 minutes, and I actually got some okay shots, all things considered. It didn't matter. I had come for wolves, and I had sure seen some now. I was absolutely elated as we rolled into Old Faithful. Arriving at the Old Faithful Snow Lodge, the only one open down here during the winter, I found my bags waiting for me. Yes, your baggage is actually sent down ahead of you on a separate truck. I don't believe I mentioned that earlier. You're allowed 2 large pieces of luggage and then a personal item for the snow coach itself. Arriving around 1 p.m., I was too early to check in. So, what to do? Go check out Old Faithful, of course. It was extremely close to erupting. I hightailed it out into the wind. Was it ever a windy day today? And then made my way over to the visitor center. So I braved the windy, cold tundra and got set up. It was definitely a little shocking seeing so few people here. True to its name, Old Faithful erupts every 90 minutes, give or take 10 minutes. During the summer months, this place is usually packed, if not the most crowded part of the entire park. That plus or minus 10 minutes really feels like forever when you're experiencing a brutal wind chill. But finally, the geyser base started gurgling, and then Old Faithful erupted in spectacular fashion. Not bad. Maybe not the largest eruption I'd seen, but some blowing snow aside, the wind and steam didn't really obscure it. Also, it wouldn't be my only opportunity to catch it. But now, it was time to go get checked in. I wasn't staying in the lodge itself, but instead one of the cabins nearby. Pros: a little more privacy, and I saved around $30 per night maybe? Cons: it is separate from the main lodge, dining, and all of that. And the only way to get my luggage over was dragging it on a sled. Nonetheless, cozy and warm, I was happy to settle in for a bit and review some of my footage. A tasty moose drool brown ale didn't hurt either. A couple hours later, I decided to venture back out for the sunset. The snowmobilers were gone now, and I had the entire geyser basin to myself. Seriously, I saw maybe 3 total people out this entire evening. I would do the hike through here in earnest tomorrow, but tonight I just wanted to take it all in. Some clouds in the sky made for an absolutely beautiful sunset, coupled with the steaming geothermal features. How incredible. I stopped to admire a hot spring and then Castle Geyser here for a few minutes, before turning around and heading back. Tomorrow would be my last day, with one more surprise in store. Up early, it was back to the Upper Geyser Basin, and I didn't have much time to spare. Daisy Geyser, another fairly predictable one, was going to erupt in about the next 30 minutes. I threw some cold weather gear on and started the trek out. The first part of the trail is at least somewhat groomed here, suitable for snowshoeing and cross-country skiing. There is a separate trail nearby reserved for these two exclusively, by the way, but this main trail here through the geyser handles these as well as regular hiking too. That being said, depending on how compacted the snow is, you might be post-holing a bit if you only opt for hiking boots. I ventured out, making haste to get to Daisy Geyser down here. I made it with about 5 minutes to spare, taking a seat on the bench and waiting for the show to start. Old Faithful maxes out around 185 feet, though is generally closer to about 140-150, whereas Daisy Geyser is smaller, capping out around 75 feet in the air, with a longer interval range of about 2 to 4 hours. For geyser predictions, you can check the visitor center or call a phone number with times. Find that in the description below. A few gurgles and bubbles later, and Daisy Geyser went off. This was definitely a more up-close and personal view than Old Faithful. Eventually, the eruption ended. I had a couple of hours of hiking time left before I had to check out and catch my snow coach back, so I decided to hike to the Morning Glory Pool before looping back along the boardwalk through the Upper Geyser Basin. It's a roughly 4-mile round-trip hike to the Morning Glory Pool and back from Old Faithful itself, and I was lucky to have the trip there quite literally all to myself. So I simply enjoyed the solitude and the geothermal features along the way. Maybe it's just me, but all these steaming vents, coupled with the rugged landscape, just look incredible. Arriving at Morning Glory, it wasn't as vibrant as I expected. One of the reasons for that, I'm told, is people throwing objects into it, which dilutes the color, unfortunately. A pity, though it was still pretty cool to see. I decided to continue the trail just a little further, heading towards Biscuit Basin and the Midway Geyser Basin, where the Wapiti Lake Wolfpack had been seen. And then I started seeing an awful lot of these, that were getting fresher and fresher the further I went. Wolf, coyote, maybe a fox? I have no idea. But what I did know is that I was by myself, and also running short on time. So I decided to turn around here. The sun was trying to peek out just a bit as I made my way onto the boardwalk loop, though the wind was picking up again. My timing wasn't great for any of the other major geysers here. save for one up ahead. Sawmill Geyser, to be exact, was in fact erupting when I arrived. A smaller geyser. This one only started erupting again back in 2021, taking a 4-year break before that. It can erupt anywhere from 9 minutes to 4 hours, with intervals of 1 to 3 hours, so at least a little bit of serendipitous timing on my part. I loved filming some close-ups of its water streams in slow motion, especially with the sunlight going through it. My time here was nearly at an end, and I lucked out to be approaching Old Faithful just before another eruption. This time, I made my way around to the opposite side, near the Blue Star Pool here, to capture it from a completely different angle. These guys just happened to be below me too, so while I was waiting, I grabbed a few shots of them as well. And then, framed nicely by these green trees, Old Faithful erupted. Dare I say, just a little higher than yesterday's? Or maybe it was just the steam deceiving me this time. Either way, a fitting ending to this winter adventure in America's first national park. Except, it wasn't. I had one more surprise that would be an even more fitting conclusion to this story. Checking out of my cabin and boarding the snow coach, we began the 4-hour journey back to Mammoth. I was lucky enough to get the front seat this time. Ideal if we were to spot any wildlife, as our driver was kind enough to put the windows down on both sides for me. One bison jam aside, we saw nothing. I finally asked if he had spotted any wolves this winter, to which he replied, a bit sheepishly, that he had seen the Wapiti Lake Pack on his drive down that very morning. Coming up near Fairy Falls again, we began to slow down and take a look. And then, one of the passengers from the back called out. There was something moving off to our left. A true gray wolf if there ever was one, making its way toward the bridge near Fairy Falls. This one didn't stick around for too long, stopping for a quick howl before continuing along and into the tree line. One last wolf sighting. How lucky was I? The answer to that question was more lucky than I knew. As we made our way up to Grand Prismatic, there was another one. A black wolf again, probably the closest to the road we had seen yet. We posted up for a while, watching this incredible wolf make its way on down. Trotting along, stopping to howl, and just generally posing. How I wish now that I had booked a proper wildlife photo tour. That's not a true regret though. Instead, it's a reason to come back next winter, if not this summer. Until the next time.